Good morning. My name's Mike Drew. I'm Vice Chair for Member Services now. It's a bit disconcerting chairing a meeting when you have no idea if anyone's listening or is even there. However, my job is to introduce the speaker, and it's often tradition to say that the speaker needs no introduction. With Jackie Weaver, this is no doubt true. However, there may be someone who does need a little of Jackie's background. Jackie has worked in the local council sector for over 25 years and is committed to the promotion and development of those local councils. She enjoys delivering training to clerks and councillors alike and believes that through training we build confidence in individuals and in turn their councils. Jackie is Silco qualified and is also a qualified counsellor, not councillor, and mediator. All three qualifications contributed to Jackie's ability to support the development of our councils and the people who work in them. Jackie is recently known more widely for the media attention following the Handforth Parish Council meeting that went viral. She's been invited to become Ambassador for Compassion in Politics and use her 15 minutes of fame to promote the importance of a code of conduct and to encourage diversity amongst our councillors. So over to you, Jackie, and let's hear your thoughts.
Thank you for that lovely introductions. I'm going to start off with these days know me for the
I think we maybe have
media,
a little bit of communication problem.
radio, lots of radio interviews, and also, of course, the Archers. And there's lots of tabloid commentary as well. And the nice thing about that so far has been my experience is that they are so often positive about our sector. Statesmen and the Times have all run positive, which was a council where we saw really appalling behaviour. I think that I hope you share the view that what you see in the media around myself is a positive thing for the sector. I really believe it is. I think it's been a very, very long time that we have been in the shadows with relatively few people knowing anything about what our level of local councils do and indeed why we matter so much. And what makes me think I have the right competence to speak for our sector? I've worked alongside you as a county secretary. Yeah, some of us have different titles, but I think most of you will recognise that one, for over 25 years. My own association, the Cheshire Association of Local Councils, has changed dramatically over my 25 years in post. We used to have a treasurer and brought in some admin support. We offered a talking shop for local councils, and they came together, and I'd like to say they came together to share best practice, but in reality they came together to share moans and groans, usually around potholes and planning. In those days, Chalk's operating budget was less than 10,000 a year. Today we have 3 staff, an active board, a dynamic training programme and direct engagement with our principal authorities to ensure that the voices of our sector are heard. Oh, and our annual expenditure has now gone up to about 140,000. Why is that? Well, that's down to you. As our members have become more active, more dynamic and more challenging, we've had to change to meet your needs, and we continue to do so. I don't believe your journey is over, as money becomes even tighter locally, it will increasingly be our sector that takes on the responsibility for communities. Certainly in Cheshire, some 10 years ago, we were reorganised into a 2-tier system. The unique selling point of this was saving money. And I'm sure money was saved. It must have been. The county council was gone, 6 district councils were gone, and in their place 2 unitaries were born. and some of us got our lives back. The number of meetings held was slashed dramatically, but so were the unitary staff. Our parishes started to feel it. There was no go-to officer for planning or highways, etc. But we stoically waited for normal service to be resumed. And then there was another dramatic cull of posts. And another dramatic cull of posts over a period of 5 years. Now, during that time, our parishes were inactive. They were waiting for things to get back to normal. But of course, they never did. Our principal authorities refocused inwards, only looking at their key priorities, and anything community-focused began to disappear. Our parishes began to realise that if they wanted community support, the kind they had previously enjoyed, they were going to have to provide it themselves. And they did. When COVID struck, our parishes were already in a place where they understood and were active in their communities. And we saw so many examples of parishes not only helping their own communities, but helping the principal authorities as they reacted to COVID. We're already seeing parishes taking an interest and often taking a lead in reacting to the climate change emergency. But we have had our own internal challenges. Far too many seats are left vacant after elections, and we have still got a long way to go in terms of encouraging diversity in our local councils. We have had to encourage, we need to encourage more women and young people to see the value of getting involved with their local council. And of course, we really have to push the Make a Change campaign. But we need to direct people to it. They won't automatically drop onto NALC's website and feel energised by what they see there. We need that personal approach that says to people in our community, we need you. But those of you who have heard me speak before know that I believe one of the greatest barriers to that is making sure that we are able to say to people, we can guarantee you a safe environment inside our councils. Of course, we continue to push for sanctions that enable us to give the real bullies and troublemakers a time out. But what can we do in the meantime? Well, stop giving the bullies what they want. Having recently engaged with someone who was the subject of a bullying complaint, I was shocked when he said to me, and in this instance it was a he, I behave badly because it gets me what I want. So let's change that. I have some councils that I support that turn themselves inside out to accommodate the bully. Everyone trying so hard to give them what they want so that they will be happy and they will step back and leave them alone. But that's not what happens. It just encourages them to continue the bad behaviour. So let me offer you an alternative. Stop putting them first. Put them at the back of the queue. Answer those emails last, not first. If the emails from people are offensive, block them. Don't give them direct contact with officers. Let them go through a third party. And in the case of staff, we need to give them permission to protect themselves and then block or redirect their email. I'm not talking here about removing the rights of a councillor, but what I'm saying is that they don't get those rights delivered in the same way. Remove the need for staff to engage on social media. And make sure your standing orders require members to speak through the chair. And if they refuse to do that, then you refuse to hear them. I know it sounds harsh, but stop allowing them to make victims out of us. But we kind of fall into two different camps. Councillors do not need to take any abuse from their peers. Block them. Don't engage with them at all. Let them talk to themselves. But for employees, it is different. And we have a duty as employers, a duty of care, to make sure that we give them permission not to engage with people who are abusive to them. I hope we will get the support we are asking for in terms of the Code of Conduct. But in the meantime, if we embrace the Make a Change agenda and encourage more and more diversity in our parishes, then who knows? Perhaps the problem will actually resolve itself. And maybe there's more we can do. It is tempting when we see others behaving badly, and remember, getting what they want from it, that our own behaviour changes. And sometimes that behaviour becomes a little passive-aggressive, and although we appear to be the most moderate people in the room, we are actually prodding them. You know the kind of thing I mean. So how do we combat that? I find that particularly in smaller councils, they say, we don't need all that formality. We don't need complicated standing orders. We all just agree how to get on. So who am I to tell you otherwise? You're telling me it works for you? Who am I to say it isn't? Well, I'm the one you come to when it no longer works for you. And now we have a mess. Those standing orders that you thought you didn't need, well, actually you adopted them in the year 19 dot. And it's your own rules that you are not following. And an example that we provided, that challenging member or member of the public with all the ammunition they need, because now it looks as if we only follow the rules that suit us. And in fact, we have lost that all-important moral high ground. So good governance is vitally important. It does not have to be drafted like War and Peace. It does not have to be used to turn meetings into a format that the UN would be proud of. But it does need to be clear, and it does need to be understood by all. Oh, and of course, kept up to date. But of course, you're not alone in this. Your county association, supported by NALG, will provide you with all the model documents and policies you will ever need. And finally, let's not forget our staff. Our clerks are there to support and advise our councils, but they cannot do that if they don't have the knowledge and confidence to do so. So do invest in your staff. Make sure your county association or the Society of Local Council Clerks provides a range of training opportunities, and make sure that your staff access them regularly. And even if your staff have been in post for a long time, there is still a lot to be gained from a refresher and from some developmental training. And make sure you take full advantage of it. So in closing, I believe our hyper-local councils are at their very best when we have local people coming together for the benefit of their local communities. That, for me, is local democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Are there any questions? You put them in the chat if you have any questions. Can I just ask you, Jackie? You're obviously known for the problem council of Hanford. How common are the Hanfords in your experience?
The quote handforths, I think, are very unusual. That level of aggression, that level of animosity takes years to build up. It isn't just a flash meeting. But there are definitely councils up and down the land where somebody perhaps has joined the council for less than philanthropic reasons. I guess the old-fashioned kind of troublemaker covers it. And they have a disproportionate effect on the morale of that council. And in really bad instances, they make an active council moribund. They take the passion and the interest and the commitment out of those people.
Thank you. Someone has asked, higher tier councils keep abandoning their responsibilities. Are we expected to take them on without finance?
I think that's an interesting question, and in a way it goes back to where I feel some of our councils were 5 years ago, with that phrase, finance follows function. And I always thought it's tripped off the tongue quite nicely. But it's not, again, it's an opinion, but it's not as if they are abandoning their responsibilities. I mean, they still have their statutory functions that they have to deliver, but it's the nice stuff. It's the stuff that makes communities more vibrant. It's the stuff that brings communities together that is now missing. And if we want that, then yes, we will be having to deliver it. And there will not be funding to help us do that. That said, one of the things that we kind of miss out on sometimes as an idea or a trick or something is that although there are lots of funding pots out there, we can't necessarily apply for them as parish councils in our own right. But what we can do is support community groups as they access that kind of funding. So it isn't quite as simple as saying you're on your own, fund it all yourself, but we may need to be smarter about how we attract money into our communities.
Thank you. Another question. Cheshire has been a hotspot for neighbourhood planning. Have you, Jackie, seen this help or hinder local councils in asserting local community leadership on planning matters?
I absolutely recognise Cheshire as a hotspot for neighbourhood planning, and we have a number of councils that are absolutely passionate about it. And my goodness, how much work they have put into delivering those neighbourhood plans. The outcomes of that are mixed. I certainly have some communities where they feel that it's enabled them to drive the development within their communities. And the key there is it's driven development rather than it has prevented development. But it's enabled them to actually get affordable housing in the places that they think it will be really helpful. But other councils that have been somewhat disappointed that actually they have things in their neighbourhood plan that on its face would appear to halt development in a particular area, but in fact development has gone ahead.
Thank you. How do local councils attract younger councillors? Recently, we had 2 younger members become co-opted councillors. One has already resigned, and one has found it much more challenging and time-consuming than envisaged. So the other one has remained, but meetings of working groups have to be tailored to her availability, and she does not have the time to respond and engage by email. This is an issue. Virtual meetings help, but the issue of job v voluntary is a problem, especially as the demands on jobs increase on a regular basis.
Oh, I think I may be about to say something controversial here. If we want to attract younger people, and that's younger people of both sexes, then again, when I'm talking about younger people, I'm probably talking about somebody under 50 rather than somebody under 20. Then the way in which we have historically run our meetings is not conducive to working with them. So that we do have to look at ourselves and look at how we might be able to change. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying at that point, everything you do is wrong. You've got to do something different to attract young people. I don't say that at all. But there are accommodations that we can make. There are things like holding meetings at different times, maybe not the full council meeting, but maybe committee meetings. There's something about being able to use working groups. And of course, working groups could, in fact, be held virtually. And there's other ways in which councillors can contribute. One of the things that sometimes I find, particularly in a smaller council, and I'm happy to be shouted down if this is not your experience, is that rather than pay for proper professional support, either through the clerk or other officers, the council keeps the council tax artificially low by councillors undertaking the work. And frankly, I think in some cases that puts an unreasonable burden on our elected members.
Thank you. Certainly,
I said it was a bit controversial.
Yeah, certainly. We've lost a young councillor recently, and that was mine. He's young and he's 30, rather than 20. Right, so I've got another question in now. I'm in Somerset, and in May 4th, district councils and the county will be ready for. Right, read it again. I'm in Somerset, and in May, 4 district councils and the county will be replaced by one unitary authority. I'm interested to know how the rural parish councils might work together to provide services and support locally.
Yes, and excuse me. I mean, that in effect is what we saw in the short introduction that I made. You know, I was saying we had a period where councils literally just kind of sat there like rabbits in the headlight, waiting until the principal authority settled, and then we assumed it would go back to the kind of model that it was before, albeit with a different name. What we see now, and this is 10 years later, it wasn't a quick fix, is that we are seeing some of our larger towns being pretty much what we used to see as the older rural urban district councils, and providing services for their neighbours. And the same has become true of our smaller councils, where we're seeing not grouping, etc., not a formal coming together, but more a kind of when we're doing something, when we're going out to tender for something, or we're commissioning something, then we commission it over a larger area, with one council taking a lead on the monitoring of it. So there's definitely a change eventually in the way in which those rural councils, but not specifically rural, urban too, begin to see their role, as there is most definitely a vacuum when you move from 3 to 2 tiers.
Just my experience locally is that 20 years ago we had a majority of female councillors on many councils. But as more women have got jobs, we find there's less willing to come forward to be councillors. Is that your experience?
I
No.
can't say it is. I believe that across the patch, the country patch, we're probably looking at about 40% of our councillors are women. But it also kind of masks that, well, you might be a woman, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a white woman. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a young white woman, etc. So, you know, there's a lot more work there about, you know, diversity. And I think that it goes back to that question about younger people again. So that one of the questions that came up for me as a county officer just recently, and it's also kind of topical with regard to the House of Commons, was about taking children into the council chamber. And the male councillors were horrified at the prospect of taking a child into the council chamber. So we don't pay care allowance. So how are we going to attract a woman who has children, maybe a single parent, to be a councillor if we don't make some accommodation for the fact that they do have caring responsibilities?
Someone's along, I won't go into the full details of it, but someone has, as a councillor, has had complaints made against them by a member of the public, and the monitoring officers dismissed the as having no evidence and described it as being publicly false, and then blocked that person. However, a councillor on the parish council has then taken up the complaints and allegations and just keeps repeating them. Um, and they're just wondering what on earth can be done in these circumstances.
Again, for the moment, there is no point in us looking outside for help, because there just isn't any. So, you know, as the councillor found, you know, even when the case was found, you know, not to hold any water, somebody else picked it up. Now it's a councillor, and, you know, nothing's changed. It still doesn't hold any water, but it's being used as a stick to beat the other person with. So all we can do in that instance is stop giving them oxygen. I don't mean that literally. That just would not be right. But I mean, and every time we kind of talk about, and I don't mean you and I, but every time we talk about it, every time we write about it, every time we put the counter position on social media, etc., we are in fact driving the agenda. So it goes back to that: block them, stop look. I mean, the most powerful thing you can say to somebody who is posting something unpleasant about you on social media is, "Oh, sorry, I don't read it. I must have missed that." because then it's pointless, because they're not having any effect on you at all because you don't see it. So it's how you protect yourself rather than how do I fight my case, because you've already fought your case and won, but now you're just left with the mess that's left behind. So I just say, state your position clearly if it's not clear, and then step back from it and refuse to engage with it.
Another question. Do you think that parish and town councils will be able to cope with the devolution that seems to be coming down the pipeline? What changes should they make?
I think we often get really worked up about this idea that suddenly parishes will have a weight of service delivery dropped upon them. And that hasn't been the case, and there's no indication that that is going to be the case. But what is happening is that you are having more opportunities to look at whether or not you can do something better for your community than is currently being done for or to your community. How do you prepare yourself for it? Well, I think you prepare for it in two ways. One is going back to that good governance. And, it's kind of like the really dull stuff, about making sure that you have all your, policies in place, they're up to date, etc., and review them regularly. It isn't that onerous once you're on top of it. And then secondly, it's about looking at making sure that you consult with your community about what it is that they want. Often we have councils that are terrified of putting up the precept. It's kind of like, I'm not going to put up the precept because, the people in our community are not particularly wealthy and they can't afford it. But actually the parish precept is pence compared with what's being raised through the other tax raising bodies. And if they actually went out to the community, and I'm not suggesting a referendum, but I'm talking about councillors engaging with just talking to people, and said, look, how would you feel if we increased the precept by £5 per person or £5 per household so that we could do A, B and C? And when councillors do that, generally speaking, the response is positive, because the fiver, to most people, and I appreciate some people are in desperate financial situations, but the majority of people are not. And that fiver isn't making a huge difference in that person's pocket, but put together with all the other fivers in the community could actually deliver something really worthwhile that everybody would benefit from. And I think we need to be less afraid of putting up our precept.
Right. Right. What are your thoughts about clustering of parish councils, especially in the present climate due to the shortage of clerks?
One of the things that I did stress was about how important it is for us to get a handle on training and make sure that we adequately train our staff, because we have a clerk shortage in Cheshire, and part of that is because of turnover, and part of that is because somebody is appointed to the job. They might be paid for 5 or 6 hours a week. They believe it to be a kind of very administrative, take these notes, type them up, come back next month kind of a job. And they suddenly find out that being a clerk isn't like that at all. And then they leave. So we're not always really honest. We don't always pay the right amount for the job. And if you're unsure about how much you should be paying, your county association can always help with an evaluation on that. So we need to attract more people into the role of clerk. In terms of clustering, my experience, and again, it's a personal experience and it's in Cheshire, of formally clustering parishes is it just doesn't work. In many ways, the real beauty of a parish council is its parochialness, if that's even a word. Its main interest is its own community. And so to come together in a larger group where, the interest of one community might not be exactly the same as all the others, it is problematic. But where it does work is where you have clustering round an issue. so that we often see parish councils coming together in Cheshire to work on something that is a specific issue for them. For example, speeding along a length of road that goes through 10 parishes. So they work together as a group on that particular issue, with one clerk leading it, so they're not all having the same discussion in all the 10 councils, and that worked very well.
Okay, thank you very much then, Jackie, for your talk and the questions and how you've answered them. We are now coming to the close of this session, and we will break for lunch, and people can have lunch with visit the exhibitors. They can go to the relevant page on this system. Okay, well, thank you very much for all your questions. Thank you very much, Jackie.